welcome back to Pro Life Without Borders with Sarah and Mikayla. We'd like to welcome all of you to our very first guest episode with Dr. Paul Kengor.
Hey, great to be with you, Sarah and Mikayla. Really, I've listened to the show before, so I'm a follower. I'm a fan.
We have a fan.
We have a fan. That's amazing.
I listened, to be totally honest, I listened to it only one time, but I don't think you've done many recordings, right?
Right.
So
I mean, that's a significant percentage of how many shows we've actually done.
Right,
so we'll
probably half.
Yeah. So I have to share, because I mentioned this when we actually talked in the one episode about inviting someone on. And of course we didn't mention your name because we hadn't talked to you yet. But that I was hoping for a specific person, and that I have had a super funny story about how I found out that you're like low-key famous. So we were at a Grove City event, and I was trying to meet the head of PA Pro-Life at the time, Michael Chica Copo.
Oh, yeah, right.
He's not anymore. He's retired, but he was. And I was like, oh, he's so cool. I want to meet him. And you came up to me and you had a couple of the kids with you and you were trying to talk to me. And I was like, not now, Paul. I'm trying to meet this guy. And the guy, like, Michael looks at me and he goes, you know, he's famous, right? And I was like, Paul? I was like, Susan's husband? And he's like, yeah.
And
I felt like
infamous. He said famous, not
he did say famous. Okay. And I did feel like a big moron because I was like, I don't know, he's Susan Kengor's husband. And the guy's like, okay.
Well, that's what I'm truly famous for, Susan Kengor's husband.
It's fair, yeah, because I had met Susan a bunch of times and I didn't know. I mean, at the time, I hadn't even been here that long. Your kids were little. I mean, they were like little. Right. And I didn't know anything. I was like, I don't know. I met his wife. She seemed real nice.
Well, we have 8 kids, and the oldest is now 27? No, 28. 28, I think. Yeah, currently.
So what you're saying is Sarah's pretty old. Did you remember some of your kids were little?
That's accurate.
Definitely not saying that.
And you guys have one of your kids has a wedding coming up, don't they?
Yeah, so one was married back in January, and then we have another that just got engaged like a week or so ago. So that wedding will be next summer. So there'll be 2. And with the first one, we have a baby on the way.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's the best part. Like, that's what keeps me going whenever my kids are making me crazy. I'm like, one day I will have grandchildren. It'll all be worth it.
Well, and you know, everyone always says, oh, the time flies right by. Well, it really does. I mean, it doesn't quite feel like it when you're in it. But at this point now, I have how many kids in their 20s? I think 4, maybe 5. And they go down to the youngest who's adopted is 10, I think. I think he'll be actually 11 tomorrow. So, but it's true. I mean, time really does fly right by.
Yeah, it does. It's like the saying of like the days are the nights are long and the years are short.
Yeah,
it's a little cliche, but it's very accurate.
So true.
Yeah. So we invited you on for a bunch of reasons because you're cool, because we like you. You and Susan are super involved in Promise of Life Network, which we absolutely love.
Yes. Amen.
And of course, Susan volunteers with us, and you guys.
Where you two do the Lord's work. Thank you.
Yeah, we absolutely love you guys, and we appreciate that. But we also went to talk, so we were talking about this a little bit offline, but Mikayla and I became completely obsessed with the Papal Conclave.
It totally consumed like 2 weeks of my life.
We actually had the live feed on our computers, and so as soon as the white smoke came out, it starts hit white smoke, and we're all like waiting, and we're like anxious because I'll be honest with you, I was hoping for Cardinal Sarah.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, that makes me feel better because I was like, I
feel validated now.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, we picked a good
one. He's up there in age, and so that was, I thought that would likely kind of knock him off, disqualify him.
Because he's in his late 70s, isn't he?
He is, yeah. I want to say he's almost 80 or 75. Yeah, why don't I know that? I knew that a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, he's up there in age, and really his time would have probably been 5 or 6 years ago. And when the cardinal, the proto-deacon came out, Cardinal Mamberti, right? And he said, Robertum. And I thought, wow, it's Sarah. Because there's not that many Roberts who were considered papabile, right? Popables. And the only other one that maybe if I had time to think about at that point that I would have thought of among the couple dozen that I had seen was Robert Francis Prevost, the American. and he was way down on the list. I mean, you would have been crazy to bet money on him. I mean, if you put $100 in Vegas on Robert Francis Prevost, you'd be a rich person right now, right? So it was so stunning that at first I didn't know, I wasn't quite sure if I heard what I heard. And at that point, I was in the offices of the American Spectator in Alexandria, Virginia, where I'm editor of American Spectator. So we had it up on the computer. And first of all, I thought, I can't believe they picked a pope already on Thursday. This was supposed to go,
Right.
multiple rounds of balloting. I mean, Francis was picked in 5. Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, was picked in 3, which is really quick. John Paul II was picked in 8. So we all thought, I mean, no consensus candidate. It's going to go probably through the weekend and then to Monday. So for it to be that quick, we thought, all right, it was probably somebody like Parolin from Italy, Pizzabola from Italy, maybe Tagle from the Philippines. The fact that it was this unknown American cardinal, I mean, he's been, Italians call him the least American of the Americans, and he was the least known of the Americans.
What does that mean? Is that a good thing?
Yeah,
Well,
like you're not.
yeah,
I feel like it's
it is.
insulting, but I don't know.
No, it is a good thing. By the way, just on my ignorance, I immediately got requests from CNN and Newsmax like right away to go on and talk about this, and I said, I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about the guy. And I was in the process of, I had just signed a contract to write a biography of the next pope. So
And
that
you're like, well, I
was
guess I
like,
better find out.
yeah, I better find out quick. And I was thinking that, Susan and I would be taking a trip to like, Tuscany or Siena or Venice, right?
You get to go to Chicago.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Susan texted me, and he's like, "Well, I guess we're going to the south side of Chicago, right?" Instead, it was a complete shock, and yeah, least American of the Americans. Well, in the sense that he spent most of his life as a priest in Peru, in Rome. The other American cardinals are cardinals in America, right? Cardinal Dolan is the Archbishop of New York. McElroy was in San Diego. Now he's replaced Cardinal Gregory in D.C. Supich is in Chicago. But here was an American cardinal who was in Peru, of all places. So I think that's one of the reasons we always thought that there would never be an American pope. Or people said never, right? At least in our lifetimes, because it was assumed that the person who was, you couldn't have like the head of the world's temporal power, the president,
Right.
and then also the head of the world's spiritual power, right? The largest church in the world, the Roman Catholic Church, both come from America. That would be seen by everybody as like too American. But this guy's really kind of the best of both worlds because he is quintessentially American, right? From Chicago, a mutt of all these different, nationalities and races. And I mean, his parents were French and Italian and Creole and Spanish and even partly African American, right? We've seen
cool.
that in his bloodline as well. In fact, I think it was one of the girls on The View claimed that he was the first black pope, right? In response to this, actually, we've had black popes before.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement to make.
Yeah,
about
So,
someone who's
he's obviously not black. He's clearly more white, but you could say that the current pope is somebody who has African American or black genetics, genes, right, roots, which is a cool thing. So in that sense, he come from Chicago, the world's the melting pot of the American melting pot. So he's very much a product of America, but at the same time was in Peru all these years. And when he steps out onto the loggia at that moment and says his very first words, which I thought was really moving in Italian, La pace sia con tutti voi, right? Peace be with all of you. In like flawless Italian. And spoke Italian, Latin, a little Spanish, because he did a shout out to his home diocese in Peru, and didn't speak any English. And I think the fact that he didn't speak any English, I had a couple people complain to me about that, but I think it was because he was maybe trying to allay any anxieties about being seen as an American pope. And at that point, he had been bishop in Peru, and now he's bishop of Rome. So in a way, his two dioceses are Spanish, and Italian. And
Right.
that's who he spoke to. And he spoke the universal language of the Catholic Church, Latin,
Latin.
as well. Now, the
I
next
wonder
day,
if
he
do you think
spoke.
he was surprised?
Do I think he was surprised?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that he wouldn't be. I now know from research that I've done on this and from Italian journalists, the Vaticanistas, they call them. So it looks like on the first round, it was kind of a three-person split, and this surprised me, between Parolin, Prevost, and Erdo, the Hungarian cardinal, who was the pick of the conservatives. But they thought Parolin thought to be pope that he would need to have 40 to 50 votes. But once Prevost showed with 25 votes, I think it put him on everybody's radar, and everybody said, we're already impressed by this guy. He has this is somebody who would speak of unity but truly believes in unity. He's a really kind of silent, thoughtful, pensive guy who's quite faithful. And so when they saw that he was right there in the running with the top three, after that he just shot up. And in the end, by the fourth ballot, he reportedly got over 100 votes.
Oh wow, I mean, that's a ton.
Yeah, it's like a landslide of all things. So going in, if you not a consensus candidate, you would have never thought of Prevost. But looking back at it now, I guess knowing what I know now, it does make sense.
That's cool. So tell us, and for our viewers, right? I mean, obviously Mikayla and I are familiar, but tell us, where does the Catholic Church stand on abortion? Like, what's the official position of the Catholic Church?
Yeah, no, the church has seen it as a grave evil. In fact, they use that word grave. And look in the Catechism, it reserves some of the toughest language on anything, on any issue for abortion. And by the way, also for anybody who helps a woman procure an abortion. I mean, they are seen as an accomplice participating in a grave evil, a grave injustice. So it's not just the person, it's herself who commits the act, any family member who's complicit, a husband or boyfriend as well is complicit. So it's condemned in the harshest terms. And when I came into the Catholic Church in April 2005, it was the very weekend actually that Pope John Paul II died, and he was the one that did Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, which is where the phrase culture of life comes from. I mean, at that point, when I came in, I knew that the one thing, I mean, I always admired the Catholic Church for its consistency over 2,000 years. And I knew going in, I had no fear that no one would ever change the church's position on abortion. I mean, that is just rock solid. And even Pope Francis, for as much as he did things that were confusing, that annoyed people, and at times created chaos and confusion, I could talk about that for an hour. On the abortion issue, he was rock solid. And in fact, he said things that John Paul II wouldn't have said, and Benedict wouldn't have said, and Prevost probably won't say, like, having an abortion is like hiring a hitman. Like, whoa, hiring a hitman.
Yeah, that's pretty strong.
The liberals had to have looked at that, right? The pro-choice Catholics had to look at that and go, ah! Hiring a hitman. So he was really strong on that issue, and the church always has been.
So you said pro-choice Catholic.
Yeah, right.
Tell me about. I'm not Catholic, and I think I get frustrated sometimes with that. And I understand what you're saying, but how do you reconcile that? Like, how does someone say I'm a Catholic, right? Okay, which is a statement of belief, of faith, of belonging to this community, but I'm pro-choice.
It's deeply troubling. It's deeply embarrassing. It's very confusing. And I mean, in fact, use a strong word within the church. It's scandalous to the church, especially when you have people like Nancy Pelosi who are out there saying, I believe in the golden rule. As far as I'm concerned, a woman's right to choose is sacrosanct to me, right? I mean, that's just, it's completely contradictory to the faith. And then to have a president like Joe Biden, the first Catholic president, well, since JFK anyway, to have him go do so many radical things on abortion as president is just incredibly harmful, right? But it's kind of like when you're in Protestantism, if you're in a church that's either conservative or liberal and you don't like it, you can go to another church, right?
Yeah, we
You
do
can
that
go
all
to
the time.
another you can go to another denomination.
Yeah.
I was just reading this morning the numbers on the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America.
Mhm.
Wow, I mean, you talk about cratering,
Mhm.
and especially on abortion and gender, sexual, LGBTQ stuff, all of that. Uh, but so if you're in that church and you don't like what's happening there, you can go to another church. But in the Catholic Church, we're stuck with these people, right? They still consider themselves Catholic and they want to be Catholic. So we'll tell them, why don't you go join the Evangelical Lutheran Church? And no, I don't want to. Right? So they kind of stay in and make everything miserable for the rest of us. Now, people ask me all the time, why don't they excommunicate this person? Right?
Right.
You hear that
Yeah,
all the
I
time.
think Protestants are looking in from the outside, and we're like, guys, you're allowed to do that. Just
Yeah.
come
Well,
out.
so an excommunicable, right, offense is something that usually involves something really contrary to, like, the theological foundations of the church. Like if you had a priest who stood up while, during Holy Communion, consecrating the Eucharist and said, you know what, forget this, hell with this, I don't believe this. This is not the body and blood. I mean, that would be the kind of thing like,
Mhm.
Mhm.
no, that goes against one of the very core tenets of the church. But to have a politician who's out there doing what a Nancy Pelosi does or somebody else, that according to the canon law in the church, the proper response for that is for the local bishop, or in some cases even cardinal. In the case of Nancy Pelosi, it was Cardinal Cordileone in San Francisco, to reach out to that person individually, right? In the spirit of the New Testament, one-on-one, reach out to your
Mhm.
brother and sister and meet with them
Right.
and confront
Yeah,
them
Matthew
directly.
18. Yeah.
Exactly, and say, you are perpetuating here a grave evil, and you're not just like somebody else out there in the streets who's pro-choice, but you're actually passing legislation.
Mhm.
You're funding Planned Parenthood. You need to stop this. You need to confess this. And part of confession is also called reconciliation.
Mhm.
You need to make reparation for this sin. You need to go and sin no more. You need to stop doing it. You need to go fix this. And if you don't, then you should, among other things, not present yourself for communion,
Right.
because that would be profaning the body and blood of Christ, to
Mhm.
quote from Paul. So, and they often do that. And in so many of the cases with these pro-choice Catholics, they walk right up and receive. They find a liberal priest. They find a priest who
Mhm.
doesn't know who they are. They do whatever they do.
Mhm.
On the other hand, though, there have been quite a number of pro-choice Catholic politicians who were told, "Don't present yourself in this diocese or wherever," and they've listened. So that happened with Cuomo. It happened with, I think it happened with Ted Kennedy. It happened to Joe Biden in Scranton, and
I
also when he
remember that. Yeah, I remember that. That was
and
a
also
big
when he was
deal.
in Wilmington, Delaware. It happened to him. It happened to him as well. But yeah,
Well,
but
and
some of them
it's
still
very
just
public, right? I mean, like you're walking up to receive communion. It's the whole
right.
focal point of the mass, right? It's you're literally accepting the body of Christ, and everyone's watching.
Everyone's watching, and you have right there at that moment, right? Catholics in the pews pulling out their phones, taking pictures, right? Here comes Bill Clinton up for giving somebody. Bill Clinton, what's he doing there, right? Puts it, or Nancy Pelosi or whoever, and yeah, and then it creates a big problem. My email fills up with people saying, "What's wrong with you guys? Why don't you excommunicate her?" And I got to go through all of this, but it's yeah, it's a big problem. It's a real source of scandal in the church. So some would say too, when they do that, they're kind of excommunicating themselves, right? They're sort of cutting off themselves. They are making a free will choice at that point to willfully sin. They've been told. They can't claim ignorance, right?
Right.
Someday they're there before, and so you say, "I didn't know." Oh, you did know. You were told many times. You were even told privately more than once, admonished by your bishop, by your particular bishop who happens to be a cardinal in the church, and you obeyed anyway. So the sin is really on that person at that time. At that point, the bishop has done what he can for the member of his flock.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we forget about that too. We're like, we want to see like action or we want to see a response. And it's like, well, I mean, people have free will. You know,
Right.
they can decide to do what they're gonna do. And that's kind of
I'm at
on them.
that
And I
point on a lot of issues, really, where, I mean, for a long time, I fought a lot of battles, and people would just get angry at me, start petitions against me, whatever they would do. And then I eventually got to the point where
That's so
I didn't say,
cool.
yeah,
Sorry,
I would be so stressed
I
out if
hope I'm
someone
so
started a
cool.
petition.
might
I
sound
want to
older
be
than
cool
it
enough
is.
one day that someone starts a petition against me.
But eventually I got to the point where I thought, well, it's not that I don't write about it anymore. I still do.
Right.
But but I got to the point where I thought, well, in the end, they make their own choice, and I can't change the world. Sometimes you can't even change one person, but you do what you can do.
Yeah. Hey, we know that feeling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're writing this biography on the Pope, and I know you write a ton. You've got a zillion books. You write for the American Spectator, and you obviously teach at Grove City, and now you're doing this biography on the Pope. How do you have and you have 8 children? One of,
Hmm.
I mean, obviously they're not all at home. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how
Well,
do you swing all of that?
basically, I like to write. I mean, I consider myself kind of first and foremost a writer. So,
Mm.
I mean, well, a dad, a husband, right? But
Hmm.
a professor as well, public speaker. But writing is what I love to do. So all the time, I'm just always writing something. If I get up, if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I haven't written anything that day, I'm ready to lose my mind. So I mean, the first thing I do is I get up in the morning and just start writing, and also I write fast. It's just something that I learned to do, and in fact, this is good advice. I know, Sarah, you've written a book, and you have to. A lot of it's organization. For example, the biography of the Pope will be probably about 80,000 words
Hmm.
altogether. And I know to some people that sounds like a lot, but it's like 2,000 words a day for 40 days. I mean, that's really nothing. Yeah, 2,000 words is easy to write. Now, if you have something that's research intensive,
Mhm.
that can slow you down. But you also have days where you write 4 or 5,000 words. You're just on a roll, right? Flying right through it. And other days where you write 500. So as long as you're organized and have a schedule planned out, and if you know how to write books because you've done it. I mean, at this point, I've written over 20 books, so I just know how to
Hmm.
do it. I know how to organize them. Then you can go pretty fast. So it's just simply kind of organization, 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 and probably passion, passion, passion. I have the passion for
Yeah,
it.
yeah. If it's a chore, you're not going to want to do it. So what is this new Pope Leo? What is his history with abortion? Like, I mean, I'm sure that was one of the first things you wanted to look into, right? You know, you've got this guy, you weren't really expecting him. All of a sudden he's coming out and you're like, what is going on? So how do you find out? I mean, are you able to look back at like writings or homilies or messages? And what is his kind of like history, I guess, with the abortion issue?
Well, in his case, there's not a lot out there.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things that makes it difficult in the case of Robert Francis Prevost. However, he does have things out there over the last 20-25 years where he's made statements in defense of unborn life, and he's even made a couple already.
Mhm.
At this point, this is, I think, the 41st day or something like that of his papacy. I know that because I have a chapter on the 40 days of his papacy. Did I say presidency?
No, you said papacy.
Papacy.
You're good.
Yeah. So he's already made a couple statements, and in fact, he made a statement. He made a couple statements for the Jubilee of Families, which
Mhm.
took place in Rome a couple weeks ago. And there too, he made a really beautiful statement about marriage being the union between a man and a woman, as well. He's more. I think he's going to be more subtle, more careful. I mean, Francis could get on an airplane with a microphone and just blabbed some sloppy statement and seemed to call into question 2,000 years of church teaching. And all of us are pulling our hair out. What did he mean by this? This man has a doctorate in canon law from the Angelicum in Rome, right? The university that teaches Thomistic thought, Thomas Aquinas, although he himself is an Augustinian. He calls himself a son of Augustine. So he's very careful in his words, and he doesn't say a lot, which I think is what the men in the conclave wanted this time. Somebody who wasn't going to be out there all the time shooting his mouth off in public.
Right.
But what he
It does seem
said
kind of
is
stressful.
solidly pro-life. Yeah, I mean, he's not. In no way does anybody have any fear whatsoever that he's going to suddenly come out and make some sort of pro-choice statement.
Yeah.
Oh, that's reassuring.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how do you like? How could the current pope? Because obviously he's leader of the church. He's not technically a political figure, though. I think he definitely carries a lot of influence in that realm. What kind of influence could we see the new pope have on political leaders, especially when it comes to abortion?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, he already made a major change with the head of the John Paul II Pontifical Academy for Life, and there they had Francis had put in place a guy that he preferred who they got rid of a lot of the previous faculty that had been there since the time that John Paul II started it in the early 1980s, I think
Mm-hmm.
1982. And the guy even made a couple of statements about contraception being permissible, maybe in this or that instance. Although if you read what he said, it's not that clear what he said. And the other guy said this, and he didn't seem to condemn. One of the things, the good thing about being Catholic is sometimes these tiny little nuances, right? Like not redefining marriage, but whether or not to give communion to the divorced and remarried, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
so at least in no way is it even on the table, right, to say that a man can marry a man or a woman could. So we these tiny little nuanced debates. So anything that suggests any sort of tiny little change on an issue like contraception sends everybody into a turmoil and tizzy. So there's somebody at the John Paul II Academy who Paglia was his name, who we were troubled by, and one of Leo's very first moves was to move him out and replace him with somebody who's really solid. I wrote an article on this for American Spectator. Maybe you could put it up on the screen a couple weeks ago. It was called something like "A Major Change for Life" by Pope Leo
I
at
think
the.
Did you send that one to me?
Yeah.
I'll
I
make
can,
sure
we
to
can throw
include
that
the
up.
link in the.
I'll send Mikayla the link.
Yep.
And I talk about how that guy oversaw one of the beatification ceremony for an Italian woman named Chiara, who
Yes.
died just a
Yeah.
few years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
that is
fascinating.
that's a heroic pro-life story. It's
Yeah.
crazy,
Well, and I think it's
crazy.
really interesting because you always think of saints and you think of them as being like thousands of years ago, but they're still like people are still being beatified. And so you have these kind of modern day saints.
Right.
And it's so easy to identify with that person and think, no, that could be me. Like I could be in that situation.
Yeah, and that's why it's important, I think, to for everybody to realize, right, the kind of disciples and sainthood and miracles. That stuff didn't just happen at the end of the first century, right? I mean, this is You get people like Mother Teresa, um, this little tiny woman from Albania, super courageous, going and speaking at Harvard, reprimanding Hillary Clinton on the abortion issue. Gianna Beretta Molla, who died, I think, 1962. And my daughter Gianna is named after her. In fact, you had a speaker named Gianna at one of the
Yeah,
big.
Gianna Jensen was an abortion survivor. And I think
Exactly.
because she was adopted, that she was named after St. Gianna because of what she had been through.
Right.
Yeah.
And Gianna Beretta Molla basically gave up her life for her child, the final child that she had. And Gianna Beretta Molla was a doctor, a gynecologist. I mean, this is somebody who had her whole career in front of her and everything. In the case of Chiara, that's even more remarkable because the first two children that she had like severe deformities and died almost immediately after birth. I forget the story. It's all in the article in the American Spectator.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was told for the third one, "Don't you dare have a child," and she did. She did have the child, and then died after that from cancer. Lost her eye. She had to wear an eye patch, and she died. She's very recent. In fact, she's not even canonized as a saint yet. But she probably will be. Well, maybe we would no. We'll see what the Holy Spirit decides on that. But
Right.
she's the last 10 years. So you need examples like that, modern saints for the modern world for modern issues.
Yeah, that was a really good article. I'll definitely send that to Mikayla and we'll include the link and we can put up something on I mean, she does all that. I don't know. So when we were talking before, well, let me back up. So obviously the Pope has political pull, even if he's not a political figure. And you had shared before that Pope John Paul II had a pretty heavy influence on the American president. So tell us
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah, he and Ronald Reagan were really simpatico, right? They agreed on so many different issues, from communism to, I mean, they were both shot and almost killed, almost assassinated, just 6 weeks apart. Reagan March 30th, 1981, and then John Paul II May 13th, 1981. But one of the issues that they really bonded over was this, what John Paul II called the sanctity and dignity of human life. One of my favorite quotes from him, and I open it in my book on these two, the Pope and a President. John Paul II, Christmas Day, 1978. Every human being is unique and unrepeatable, right? Every person
Beautiful.
is unique and unrepeatable. And I think that's something that you could even tell to women in your network, right? Listen, you are unique and you are unrepeatable. There's never going to be another you. There's no one else out there like you. And I juxtapose that next to a Reagan quote from November 4th, 1991, where Reagan said, "There is purpose and worth to each and every human life," right? Purpose and worth to each and every human life. So we're not all, as these guys would say, the communists said, you're not the masses, right? Everyone's made in the imago Dei, in the image of God. And another favorite quote of mine from John Paul II, he said, "The only true freedom," and he said this when he was standing next to Reagan in Miami, September 10th, 1987, where the Polish Pope is quoting the American founding fathers, right? And all these different philosophers. He said, "The only true freedom, the only freedom that can truly satisfy, is the freedom to do what we ought as human beings created by God according to his plan." So yeah, the only true freedom, the only freedom that really satisfies, is the freedom to do what we ought as human beings created by God according to his plan. So this idea, to quote Benedict XVI, this confused ideology of freedom in the West, we think that freedom is about doing whatever you want. That is not the Christian conception of freedom, right? True freedom, the only freedom that really matters, is the freedom to do what we ought as human beings created by God according to his plan. So freedom actually has constraints. There are fences around freedom, right? There are borders within that. It's not the freedom to do whatever you want. I mean, that's the devil's definition of freedom. That's an abuse of freedom. So that's something that John Paul II understood. Ronald Reagan understood that as well.
Well, I think it's really not that we were necessarily planning on talking about this, but mentioning communism, how so many people, so many modern day, like the Gen Z, Gen Alphas, think that communism is like this fantastic idea and everyone's going to get what they're supposed to get. And what they're missing is that it takes away all of your individuality.
Well, and also to connect it to the abortion issue, communist regimes were always the worst in terms of abortion. And the Soviet Union legalized it right away, immediately, under Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, 1917. 4 years before that, Lenin had written in Pravda, called for the unconditional annulment of all laws against abortion. So they wanted abortion 24/7. It got so bad in the Soviet Union that Stalin actually banned abortion for a time, because he thought, we're not going to have a population left at this point. That's how bad it got. By the 1970s in the Soviet Union, this is incredible because the statistics on the number of abortions per year in America. In the Soviet Union, they were averaging 7 to 8 million abortions per year in the 1970s. 7 to 8 million per year in the 70s. What are we in America? A million, maybe?
A little over a million usually, yeah.
Yeah, a little over a million, which
is still a lot, but wow, 7 to 8 million.
Yeah. And in fact, our numbers were even, I think, below a million even before the abortion pills started exploding out onto the market. But so they had a similar sized population, and they were at 7 to 8 million per year. And the worst countries for abortion: Cuba, North Korea, China. I mean, always the communist countries have been the most liberal in terms of abortion policy. And that's one of the reasons why John Paul II, coming out of Poland, a communist country, referred to it as the culture of death, right? Culture of death, not just communism, but also abortion, and generally this embrace of death by so many secular atheistic elements in the culture.
Well, and it really does. It all goes together. Like it's not. I
It
think we
does.
talk about abortion, right? I mean, it's one of the issues that we touch on most often, but it's not like happening in a vacuum. Like it's not like it's this one
Right.
issue that's like all boxed off and it doesn't touch anything else and nothing else touches it. Like it really just brings this level of death and destruction and like the family unit breaking down. Like it just causes all these problems, and people don't really want to talk about that.
Yeah, and John Paul II would say all the time, right? That, whatever that might be, that is a violation of the sanctity and dignity of human life. And it would be an issue like the Nazis, Auschwitz, right? It would be the Gulag Archipelago in the Soviet Union. It would be abortion. It would be, whatever that might be. So all of these, fell under this, this general violation of the sanctity and dignity of human life.
Right. Yeah, and I think typically when we say that, we are talking about abortion, but it really is, it's so much more than just abortion. And we talked about our a couple of weeks ago we did a podcast on the euthanasia issue and medical assistance in dying in New York passing that. And that's also a pro-life issue. Like that's
Right.
something
Yeah,
that needs
that's
to be
right.
addressed.
Yeah, euthanasia, and I mean all of these, right? And this is, in fact, Pope Leo mentioned all of that just a few weeks ago. And you need to learn to protect life from the womb to the tomb, right?
Mm-hmm.
From, as the Catholic Church says, natural conception to natural death, right?
Yeah.
So and another phrase that John Paul II and Reagan both used all the time was they called the right to life the first and most fundamental of all freedoms, right? The first and most fundamental of all human rights. If you don't have the right to life, then no other rights matter. In fact, as Reagan said, all other rights are impossible. Your starting point is the right to life. You protect that person's right to life, and then that person can go on to have a right to freedom of speech and assembly and religion or whatever else. But first and foremost is the right to life, the right to be born.
Right. You can't do any of that if you're not alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Can't really assemble.
Reagan said, I've noticed that everybody in favor of abortion has already been born.
Classic quote. Love that.
That's actually a bumper sticker on the back of my van.
I think I've definitely seen it.
Yeah, I definitely see it.
I'm like, oh, there's the Kengor stuff.
Right, exactly. Yeah, people know it's me.
So I know that that John Paul II met with Reagan and had a lot of influence there. Is there any other political leaders that he met with, or Francis, or whatever that Pope Leo can look back on and say, like, this is how I want to influence the world? Like how does that? I'm wondering, like, the current Pope, how much do they look to their predecessors and say, he did that and it went really well, like it worked really well, like, is that something I should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, popes and presidents have often found ways to work together. In fact, Donald Trump visited Pope Francis, I think it was May 2017, so just a few months into his first term, and everybody thought, oh, these two are going to go at it, man. When Francis talked about we shouldn't be building walls, we should be welcoming the migrant and so forth, and everybody was just kind of floored that these two were smiling and getting along together. But yeah, I think they understand. I think that this American Pope uniquely understands. In fact, I know he does because I've already read a couple statements that even though you talk about welcoming the migrant, well, we all welcome the migrant. I mean, we all favor legal immigration, but you also realize that countries have borders, right? They have laws on immigration. There's only so many people legally that they set limits on that they can bring in. And on the other hand, I think the president needs to understand that the Pope represents an organization without borders, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a universal church. Catholic, small c, actually means universal. So the Pope's people, they're not separated by a border, a wall between Mexico and the United States. He just sees as everybody seeking a better life and more dignity. So his constituency, if you will, right, is to protect that. So you can see why a pope and a president would clash on that issue. In a way, that's almost like two different politicians with two different interests that are eventually going to butt heads. But I think Leo XIV, being an American, will probably understand this better than Francis would have. Because Francis was from Latin America, and no one wanted to go to Argentina. I mean, people aren't leaving. I mean,
nobody's beating down the door.
Yeah, but exactly. But people in Honduras and and Mexico, right? They're not trying to find ways to get to Argentina. They want to come to America.
Mm-hmm.
I was going
I
to
know
ask.
there's an ocean in between. I know, folks. I get it. I understand. I know.
I was curious your opinion. So I'm younger than Sarah. So I'm considered a millennial, right? So I've noticed
I am also a millennial, for the record.
but I'm like the young millennial. Like sometimes I'm Gen Z, and you're like the old millennial.
Thank you.
Sarah
Thank
just gets
you.
in.
But I do see a lot of conversation amongst people my age, and quite frankly, even some like memes and jokes about the Catholic Church's opinion of our new, or relatively recent vice president, seeing as how he is practicing Catholic. What is your understanding of what that relationship could possibly look like? Because I just see so much about like, oh, the Catholic Church hates JD Vance. And I'm just like, I don't understand.
I thought it was profound to see the first picture that I saw of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio together with Leo the 14th. And by the way, look at that picture. They're all smiles. I mean, it looks like they're all joking about something. In fact, Leo the 14th is a Republican, and he voted in the Republican primary. He voted in 2016. And I have to wonder if maybe even said Rubio, I voted for you in the primary in Illinois in 2016, because he didn't vote in the general election that year. We know that. So it's quite possible that he voted for Rubio in 2016, which I actually did. I voted for Rubio in 2016. And so it's quite possible he did that. But those three, you have the two highest ranking officials in the U.S. government below the president, J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, both converts to the Catholic faith. And now you have an American pope. And I imagine, too, Mikayla, when the three of them were sitting there together in the Pope's office, they must have been saying, could you imagine? None of us a year ago could possibly imagine.
Yes. They're all like hanging out together now.
Yeah, like this is crazy. And then their wives come in, right? J.D. Vance's wife and Marco Rubio's wife. So I think the future of American Catholicism was right there in that room, because in 2028, one of those two guys is going to be the Republican nominee. It's going to be J.D. Vance. It's going to be Marco Rubio, one of the two. And you want a prediction? I think it'll be the two of them on the same ticket, frankly. So it's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's really interesting what they were developing there. And I'll add this about J.D. Vance. Unlike, all right, I'll take a shot at Nancy Pelosi.
We've already done it. It's fine. We're not mad about it.
But J.D. Vance, as a modern convert, is really knowledgeable about the faith. And so is Rubio. I have Rubio's memoirs right over there. And it's the best political memoir I've ever read. He clearly wrote it himself. Someone didn't write it for him. And he talks at great length about his conversion into the Catholic faith. So these are two guys that theologically understand it. They get it. So they could, when J.D. Vance, when Cardinal Prevost had put up that X or Twitter statement in response to something that J.D. Vance said, that all the liberals immediately jumped on that as soon as it had to do with J.D. Vance quoting a document from Augustine. So here is Prevost, who's like an expert on Augustine with a doctorate in canon law from the Angelicum, kind of stepping in because he's like an expert on Augustine. So this isn't just some fluff debate about this or that issue, or even a kind of crazy statement from Nancy Pelosi about why she should receive the Eucharist. This was actually like a theological debate, a kind of nuanced theological debate. So I think they'll all get along and have a lot of respect for each other.
I don't think I voted for Rubio. Now I'm like, I think I voted for Ted Cruz.
Yeah. For me, it was either Cruz or Rubio, because I was in the Pennsylvania primary, and at that point it was Trump, Cruz, Rubio, and the guy from Ohio, Kasich.
Yes. Yeah.
And I voted for Rubio, and it was like a 4-person race at that point. They were all split. And then Trump won, of course, and was the general election guy in November.
Yeah, which was wild. I still remember being like, wait, what happened? Like,
yeah,
it really.
And I should add, hanging out with Rubio and his wife and Vance and his wife at the installation ceremony for the Pope on May 18th was the Pope's brother, Lou, who is a big Trump MAGA Republican,
that's cool.
and is from Florida. And so Shirley has voted for Marco Rubio.
Probably. Yep.
So
that would make sense.
A funny connection too.
It is a little bit weird. Like you said, Susan texting you, I guess we're going to Chicago.
Yeah.
We were like, he's went to Villanova? Like, that's not even exotic.
Yeah,
like, come on. Villanova.
Yeah, right. I know, Villanova.
Like, I could drive there. That doesn't sound like a school the Pope should go
like
to.
Villanova, Spain. That would be cool, right?
That would be cool.
Yeah, but
there's a shot, a photo of Pope Leo wearing a White Sox cap. And our board president is a diehard Chicago Cubs fan. And so he's...
There's not a lot of White Sox fans. It's kind of a weird, but then again, that's where he grew up close to Comiskey.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just interesting to have someone who's like leading on the world stage, and he went to Villanova. He's like right here.
They were wearing shirts last week. He did a videotaped streaming thing at Wright Field, which used to be Comiskey, and they were in Chicago. One of the guys was wearing a shirt that said "Da Pope," right? DA Da Pope. Like if you guys remember that Saturday Night Live skit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different vibe.
Yeah,
I'll explain it to you later, Mikayla.
It's interesting. So Dr. Kengor, just as we kind of think about wrapping up, if you could give a charge to American Catholics in light of the first American Catholic Pope, the political landscape we're in, kind of the landscape about abortion, what would your charge be to American Catholics?
Well, I'd say to be Catholic, right, first and foremost on this issue.
Simple enough, yeah.
Truly follow the teachings of the Church, and I got to say, I think the vast majority of Catholics that I meet are pro-life on the abortion issue, especially. I mean, you know how the polling goes on this, right, Mikayla, Sarah? It depends on how you define your support of abortion, right?
How you ask the question.
Yeah, it depends on how you ask the question. So I think and especially, and it's like this with non-Catholics, Protestants as well. The people who actually go to church every week, right? The Catholics who go to Mass every week, once a week like they're supposed to. The ones who go to daily Mass, they're kind of like, 80% plus on all of these issues in support of pro-life. The numbers will break down issues like contraception, which has been, something, Humanae Vitae by Paul VI, 1968, coming out against contraception. So that's always been a big problem with Catholics. But one thing I admire the Church about that is they don't take a poll, right? And the Pope doesn't say, well, we've been trying since 1968, and they're still not with us on this issue. I think we need to change to get more money in the plate when we pass it around on Sunday. No, I mean, they believe that that's an immutable truth of the Church, and I think they could teach it better. They could try to. A lot of the priests who try to do homilies on this get attacked by some 70-something Catholic who comes up and, you can't tell me what to do with my body, right? And then the guy's afraid to after that. But but on the abortion issue, just be Catholic. Support the sanctity and dignity of human life. Support the culture of life.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you joined us. We really appreciate your time. This is great.
Yeah, this is great.
Susan and I caught the podcast a few weeks ago when we were away for a weekend for our anniversary in Erie, and we drove around Presque Isle. Rainy day, cold. Drove around the outside of it, and we were listening to your podcast.
And you got to listen to what a beautiful.
Yeah, I was like, what an honor to celebrate your union.
So, Mikayla, usually we call it a Jesus moment, but we end every podcast with like a Bible verse or a scriptural thought, and I know Mikayla has one for us. We'll use that to wrap up. You do, right?
Just make one up.
Just make something up.
I think that's heresy. Actually,
yeah, whichever way you slice it, I think that's heresy.
I don't know if this is true. My friend Bill Clark, who met John Paul II, and all these people said that the Bible 365 times uses a phrase or a variation of "be not afraid," and I don't know if that's exactly right, but of course it's all through the scriptures, and that was a favorite statement of John Paul II: "Be not afraid." And I would tell everybody out there on our side, especially you doing the work that you're doing, be not afraid. Stand for the truth, and be prepared to take your lumps for it.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. We did it. Well, he did it.
Bails me out. I made it. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate your time, and this has been so. I could talk forever, so like we have to stop.
Well, thank you both, and thanks for all that you do, and people watching, support their organization and all that they do. They're truly doing the Lord's work. I'm a supporter.
Yep.
Personally.
Yeah, you put your
My
money where
wife
your
is,
mouth
my
is, and we
family
appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, you guys are very involved, and it means a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and thank you to our viewers, our listeners, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Take care.